Hello, and welcome to Common Censored. I'm Lee Camp. I'm here with Eleanor Goldfield.
Hello.
And this is the show where we talk censored stories and people, sensible solutions, and common ground movements to fight and build.
And sometimes other shit.
And, we got a great show for you. Thanks for joining us. As always, we are back every week. Don't you think? Pretty exciting.
Don't I think we're back every week? For the most part, yes.
No, I meant, don't you think it's pretty exciting?
It's very exciting.
So let's get into it. We'll be talking about Martin Luther King Day in a second here, but I wanted to start off with what has become a near weekly election update. And this one actually mixes with the fact that we just put out what I believe is perhaps the most suppressed episode yet of Redacted Tonight. We are regularly suppressed on YouTube. They don't tell our subscribers, our over 200,000 subscribers, about the episode often,
and they frequently unsubscribe people.
They'll unsubscribe people. Yeah, they'll unclick the bell, which means you're supposed to be alerted about the episodes. There's many ways they can suppress content. This one, I think, has so far this weekend, it looks like it's gone out to about maybe a fifth or less of our viewers. And you might think, well, what is the topic that seems to have warranted this impressive suppression? What was this Redacted Tonight about how to spot Jews in the wild? Was it
That's a trick question. Jews are never out in the wild.
Was it about how to effectively beat your children? What exactly was it that needed suppressing? And I did the opening segment on how the California primary elections are kind of rigged, but there is a way to get your vote. It's just very difficult, and I go through the details of that. So I am basically showing people how to effectively vote, effectively partake in our democracy, and that is the episode that is most suppressed.
And for those of you who haven't seen it, even if you don't live in California, this is a very important, it's the opening segment. It's a very important segment to watch because, of course, these tactics are not just used for California, although there's a nice twist in California that involves Nazis. So you should definitely watch it because it's full of a lot of twists and turns. It's like Memento.
I am going to go through, it'll take me about 30 seconds to go through the basic points of it, because I do want people who just listen to this and don't watch the TV show to know how to vote. If you're in California, know anyone in California, or even just post on a Facebook page that is shown to Californians. Here's the deal real quick, is if you are so Bernie Sanders voters and other people such as Tulsi Gabbard and stuff, many of them are independents or consider themselves independent outside the mainstream Wall Street parties. And if you are an independent...
41% of Americans are actually registered as independents. It's the largest group. Right. Democrats and Republicans have something like 27% respectively.
Yeah, 28% each on the last Gallup poll.
Anyway, sorry, go ahead.
No, it's a great point that more independents than either of the two parties. So if you are an independent, first step is make sure you are not signed up as the American Independent Party. If you signed up as that, then you basically signed up for a borderline neo-Nazi party because it turns out the quote-unquote American Independent Party their stances are like against gay marriage, despising immigrants, all this gun stuff that they're really into. It seems anti-women because they literally call for all men to join their party.
They capitalize men, too. Like, they're very emphatic about only men, which also makes it seem like some sort of homoerotic orgy that they're vying for, which most homophobes are.
Who's to say they aren't?
I think they are.
So if you are signed up for that party, you probably don't mean to be because those type of people don't listen to this podcast. So make sure you're not signed up for that. Second is if you are a no party preference is a way you can sign up to be an independent in California. You sign up to NPP, no party preference. But the thing is, and this is how they rigged the primary last time around, if you go into the voting booth, or you can vote early, activists are recommending people vote early. If you vote early or at the voting booth and you say, I'm here to vote, I'm no party preference, they'll give you a ballot that does not have the presidential choices on it. And then, even if you ask, where are the Democratic presidential choices, they'll say, no party preference people cannot get the Democratic ballot. But here's the thing. It is true you can't get the Democratic ballot, but you can get the one that is called the Democratic crossover ballot, which has the presidential choices on it. And they're educated. These polling place people, and many of them have come forward and said they were trained to basically not give people the ballot with the presidential choices. So you have to say literally the golden phrase, I want the Democratic crossover ballot. If you are in California and you're hearing this, remember the phrase, I want the Democratic crossover ballot in order to get the presidential choices on your ballot. And again, they're recommending you vote early because you can start voting February 3rd. I think the actual primary in California is March 3rd. So there's a month of early voting. If you vote early, you can deal with this fuckery and actually have time to deal with it. Don't take a provisional ballot. Actually get your right to vote. Anyway, that's what the show was about, the episode of Redacted tonight, which I recommend you watch because there's more details. But... and that's the most suppressed episode I think we've ever had, at least in the past couple of years. And clearly there is an interest of the powers that be to not reveal the appropriate way to vote in certain states.
I, for one, am shocked because I thought after 2016 they'd really learn their lesson and step aside and allow democracy to work in terms of our voting system. I am shocked.
There was that moment where Debbie Wasserman Schultz came forward and said, "Oh my God, what have we done? I am so sorry that we have tried to suppress the vote, tried to destroy true progressives, tried to make sure that this is a corporate Wall Street party. I can't. My heart is broken right now. I can't believe this happened."
Okay,
and
for
when
those of
she
you who
said
don't-
that, it was amazing.
For those of you who don't know, Lee's being sarcastic.
Was the sarcasm on thick enough for that?
Sometimes you never know, because I think we've all had those moments where we say something sarcastic and somebody we're talking to actually believes us. So I just wanted to put that out there in case you're new to Lee's particular brand of bullshittery.
So let's move on to Martin Luther King Day, which may be the day you're listening to this.
It may be, indeed. So basically, many folks know that, you might just think you have the day off of work and not know why. But January 20th is Martin Luther King Day. And Lee, you had a great phrase.
I want to give this. So I'm pretty sure I misheard this. I was listening to great podcast, Loud and Clear. We've mentioned it before. You should check it out. And one of their guests, I think he said the sanitization of Martin Luther King Jr., but I heard the Santasization, which I think is an awesome phrase or term.
I love that.
The Santasization of Martin Luther King Jr. because
make him some fairy tale character
he's been taken as he was a revolutionary figure, and they're slowly watering him down and eroding him down to like a jolly old guy who is like, why don't black people get the right to vote? Ho, ho, ho. Like, the Santasization is pretty awesome.
Yeah. So for folks who've paid attention, you've likely, or even if you haven't, you've likely seen folks like, Mitch McConnell out there quoting Martin Luther King and shit like that. People that would and do vehemently disagree with everything that Martin Luther King Jr. stood for, everything from the issues of war, poverty, and of course race. Now get to tweet something nice about him, and then they look basically sanitized.
They look inclusive. They've actually done the opposite of what Martin Luther King stood for, which is they're using him to make it seem like bipartisan issues that they stand for, when in fact they are, many of their policies are racist in one form or another, whether it be locking people up at the border or, stopping people from being able to get driver's license if they're in the country as an immigrant. You can go down the list, the Muslim ban. These are all like racist policies, and they're claiming Martin Luther King.
Yeah, and I think I quoted this last year, but I'd also like to quote it again because I think it's important. Also important to note that MLK, for instance, particularly towards the end of his life, was very much in line with ideas that overlapped with the ideas of, say, Malcolm X or the Black Panthers. So this idea that he was some sort of absolute pacifist that didn't believe in the rights of communities to defend themselves is bullshit. It's another of those like Santasization ideas, as well as the idea that he just cared about issues like race, when actually towards the end of his life he was also vehemently against the Vietnam War, and he was also planning, but like the Poor People's Campaign, which we saw a resurrection of here in DC not too long ago. But he was really doing the dangerous work of connecting these issues, which again is behind the reason why he was assassinated when he was. It's incredibly dangerous to connect issues like war and poverty and race and gender. I mean, that shit, especially when your voice is as strong as somebody as MLK.
And I was gonna say this week on Redacted, what I'm gonna talk about is how that last year of his life, not to say what he did previous to that wasn't incredibly dangerous. I mean, he was stabbed at one point. It was very dangerous. Not just what he did with race, but what he was also doing with poor people. But it seems that the things that made him beyond the pale, and they realized that the amount of power he had combined with certain ideas was just too much for the empire to sustain, to put up with, was when he switched and started questioning capitalism more and questioning the Vietnam War. Because he had actually held out, not saying much about the Vietnam War for a while. And then the guy who became his lawyer, but his name is Dr. Pepper. He ultimately became the King family lawyer, but he wrote an article for Ramparts magazine about the number of people and children being killed in Vietnam that really got to Martin Luther King, and he ended up meeting him and joining him on his, various pursuits around the country. And then William Pepper I believe it's William, has now written the book on how he was assassinated. And I'd just like to remind everybody that in the only trial that has ever been held on the death of Martin Luther King, the jury, after hearing from 70 witnesses, found that it was a government conspiracy, both local government and federal, that took out Martin Luther King Jr. So that is you don't learn in history. It was actually in the New York Times in a tiny little blurb in the back in 1999, I believe, the only trial ever held.
Yeah, and also, if folks are interested in hearing more, Lee, you did an interview with Dr. Pepper on your show, which was really great.
He has. There's a third edition out of The Plot to Kill King, where he has basically, this guy has spent his life since King's death pursuing what really happened that day, and in a way that no one else has. And, of course, he's been ridiculed and attacked for it and called a conspiracy theorist and all that shit that they have to do to cover it up when the government is involved in assassination.
Yep. So I'm going to bounce around this really quick because I'm obviously not going to read the whole thing. It's pretty long, but this is from Martin Luther King's letter from Birmingham jail. Folks might be familiar with it. You can Google it to read the whole thing. I definitely recommend it. If you have classes or coworkers or shit, print this shit out and give it to them. This was sent from Birmingham jail in 1963, was when he was incarcerated, and it gives you kind of a glimpse into his perspectives, not only on things like direct action and civil disobedience, but also how he feels about this sort of patience that is always thrown at us, particularly today too. We see this with climate activism that, we'll just be patient, or we don't have time to be patient.
Right.
So I'm just going to read a few lines here. Quote, "We should never forget that everything Adolf Hitler did in Germany was legal. It was illegal to aid and comfort a Jew in Hitler's Germany. I must confess that over the past few years, I have been gravely disappointed with the white moderate. I have almost reached the regrettable conclusion that the Negro's great stumbling block in his stride toward freedom is not the white citizen's counselor or the Ku Klux Klanner, but the white moderate, who is more devoted to order than to justice, who prefers a negative peace, which is the absence of tension, to a positive peace, which is the presence of justice, who constantly says, 'I agree with you in the goal you seek, but I cannot agree with your methods of direct action,' who paternalistically believes he can set the timetable for another man's freedom, who lives by a mythical concept of time, and who constantly advises the Negro to wait for a more convenient season. Shallow understanding from people of goodwill is more frustrating than absolute misunderstanding from people of ill will. lukewarm acceptance is much more bewildering than outright rejection. And I think, again, that's Martin Luther King's letter from Birmingham jail, and that was just a small snippet. I definitely, again, recommend that folks read the whole letter. It's incredibly powerful, and the echoes that we hear and feel today are so incredibly strong. And I think that that can really serve as some powerful insight into our fights on the front lines today as well.
And what you've said fits perfectly with it. Reminded me of Phil Oakes' Love Me, I'm a Liberal.
Yeah.
For those who have never seen Phil Oakes,
Oh my God, it's hysterical.
Go watch the video or listen to the video of Phil Oakes singing Love Me, I'm a Liberal. I want to do just the first couple of verses. I'm not going to sing them. Don't worry. That would
Oh God, you scared me.
We would lose every
I was
listener.
about to turn off your mic.
There's just 2 minutes of silence, and you're like, thank you. All right. It goes, I cried when they shot Medgar Evers. Tears ran down my spine. I cried when they shot Mr. Kennedy, as though I'd lost a father of mine. But Malcolm X got what was coming. He got what he asked for this time. So love me, love me, love me. I'm a liberal. I go to the civil rights rallies, and I put down the old DAR. I love Harry and Sydney and Sammy. I hope every colored boy becomes a star. But don't talk about revolution. That's going a little bit too far. Love me, love me, love me. I'm a liberal. Oh, so brilliant.
And there are several people who have updated it for today. I can't remember his name, but there was somebody that performed at a rally that did a modern version that talks about like Assange and Hillary Clinton, and
right.
it's like and that's the thing. It's like shit doesn't like the situations don't change. It's just the names that change, right? You get you get new players on stage, but it's the same fucking stage in the same play.
Yeah, indeed. It keeps circling back, and you see where the ideas, the level of ideas that the kind of empire will approve of and foster a certain type of speech and a certain brand of topics. And when you go beyond that, step one is to kick you off of those airwaves, as you and I have been. Step two is to then malign you. Right now, I'm in a fight with Wikipedia, because they're doing their efforts to trash me on my Wikipedia page. And then, if you were to get actually very powerful, like a Martin Luther King or something, then they take further steps, such as setting you up by the FBI or taking you out.
And I think perhaps, before we wrap up on this topic, I think one of the most powerful things that they did with him is something that I've seen happen all over the country. For instance, when I was in West Virginia, them amputating the people from their radical history. And so I think that is a very powerful, and I'm not just saying this, is the daughter of a historian, you cannot understand your present or build your future if you don't understand your past and where you came from.
You're saying
and where
you're saying we should amplify their radical past.
Well, right, but also take back this radical past that has been Santasized by, I can't say that word. I like it. I just can't fucking say
I
it.
just made it up, or I think I did. It's possible they actually did say that, and someone has actually said that, but I think I made it up. It's okay.
It's like I can't say the words.
Statistics.
Thank you. But anyway, my inability to string together words with lots of S's and T's aside.
You did have some spaghetti for dinner.
You know what? I think that it's incredibly smart, and there's an Orwell quote too that talks about how if you control the past, you control the present, and that's very true. So I think the idea that Martin Luther King has become this sort of whitewashed, sanitary idea keeps us from the radical reality that was his work, and that makes it very easy for them to say, well, what are you basing this off? No, there's no precedent to be radical like this. There's no reason for you to get so angry. You're just an extremist, when in reality we're not nearly as extreme as one of the most quote unquote sanitized people in our history. So I think that's a very important piece of this is to use the MLK Day as a window to look at what else has been sanitized in our history, whether that be things like May Day or the mine wars in West Virginia. Like, what else have they amputated from our past that can dictate what our or that can enhance our understanding of the present and build our future? Despite
amputating some of them, we still have that like ghost feeling, like a ghost limb.
Right, exactly.
Where you're like, it still itches. But yeah, I mean, it's interesting with Martin Luther King because I think initially it was to malign him, and they were hoping that they could get enough of America to believe that he was some terrible human. They also, by the way, called him a communist or a communist sympathizer. He was. They believe the Russians were promoting him. Does any of this sound familiar? Does it sound like we're going off an old script? But I think they found that after his death, they were unable to stop him from being viewed as a hero. And so then the next step has been a generation-long attempt at Santasization.
I'm going to leave that word to you.
Yes. Some quick notes here before we continue on. We got some environmental news coming up, some big drone news. A lot of good stories coming up. But if you feel like you're getting anything out of this episode, I hope you'll go to patreon.com/commoncensored. Thank you all so much for those of you who have joined up recently. I haven't read the names of those joining up in a long time, so I thought I'd go ahead and go through some of them.
Woo!
Yeah. And by the way, keep in mind, these are the names they put down, so some of these are funny. They're not necessarily these real names. Eugene V. Chomsky. Fred Stefanovsky. That could be a real name. Gadfly. Google or Gucci? No,
Google.
Gucci.
Google. If Google's a patron of our show, we
amazing.
should have more money.
That'd be incredible. Yeah, they should give us more. Greg Hill, thank you so much. Greta, Howard Harris, Irate Scientist, I agree with you. JT, Jacob Gorelick, Jason, and another Jason, and Jason Leary, and Jeff Winslow, Jennifer Monago, Jeremy, another Jeremy, Jerry Tatum. Thank you guys so much, and maybe I'll go through more names next week.
You're awesome.
Yeah, you're awesome. You make the show possible. We have no ads. We have no advertisers. We have no sponsors. No one's paying us to do this. So it all comes up to you whether you all want this show to continue. Another note, Philadelphia. We are performing in Philadelphia this coming weekend. Saturday's already sold out, but we've added a show Sunday. So I hope you will come to enjoy some stand-up comedy, some furious stand-up comedy, and some amazing spoken word and music, and so much more. So that's at leecamp.com. You click the schedule tab, and as I think I made clear, Eleanor will be opening the show, as well as Krish Mohan. And we will also be at the anti-war protest in Philadelphia on the 25th, that Saturday. At City Hall, yeah. So I hope if you're around, you'll join us there as well. And in many cities, I don't know if you want to say more about this, but people can find protests in their cities.
Yeah, absolutely. It's a national day of action, so you can check out Answer Coalition, and I'll put that URL in the show notes, but it is answercoalition.org, and you can go onto their website and find the location for yours. Or, hey, they have, that you can reach out to them if you want to start your own protest on the 25th in your city if it's not already listed. So, yeah, this is a national day of action, and this really, again, like we talked about last week, it keeps the momentum going with regards to building and diversifying the anti-war movement, making connections between issues, and keeping the pressure on, and keeping this threat of war, not just a potential war, but the ongoing wars, these wars in our active conscience, and not just kind of buried. So,
damn straight. A couple more notes. I'm not going to go through all the cities I'm headed to, but New York City. I have found out that the actual book release event will be March 7th in New York City at Strand Books, one of the great independent bookstores in New York.
Fucking awesome.
And here's the thing. It is free if you buy the book. If you go to leecamp.com, click on the schedule tab, and click the tab for New York City. We may run out of seats, though. So to reserve your seat, you have to go there, click that, and purchase the book, which will get you in for free. Artkillingapathy.com is where you can get all of Eleanor's work, her spoken word, her music, her TV show. It's all there. And you can email us and give us topics or ideas, commoncensored@protonmail.com. And last thing is, as I said, we're very suppressed and censored and everything else. So the best way to keep in touch is via email. If you text the word censored, CENSORED, to 33777. In the United States, you'll get signed up to the email list.
Amen.
Shall we continue?
Yes. So recently, this was last week, there were a bunch of environmental groups that decided to sue the Trump administration because of a plan to open millions of acres of public land to fracking. And they called this, quote, illegal. And this is something that's been on the docket for quite some time. People might remember that Trump has slashed a lot of environmental regulations, and that sucks. And I want to make that very clear. I do believe that sucks. However, ... there's a problem with making it sound, just like any other issue, really, that this is something that we can lay squarely at Trump's feet. So, for instance, I'm going to go back to West Virginia because that's where my brain's been for a lot recently. Trump had proposed slashing some coal ash regulations that had been put into place under Obama. And these coal ash, for folks who don't know, coal ash is, slurry is really what it is what happens when you wash coal. And the reason that you have to wash coal is when you pull it out of the ground, it's quote unquote dirty, like it becomes clean. But
what are the odds it's dirty? Yeah.
But the idea is that when you put unwashed coal into the burners, there's a lot of like extra shit that doesn't. It's not as streamlined in terms of energy output. So what you do is you wash it off and you get rid of like the gunk that's not part of the actual lump of coal. And in order to do that, you have to use very, very harsh chemicals. Chemicals that have been linked to all kinds of fucking cancers, nosebleeds, even chemical burns on the body. And so what they do...
what do you think they do with all of that extra shit after they wash off the coal?
What they do, Lee, I'm so glad you asked.
Do they put it in the Slurpees? Is that why it's named that?
They dump it into coal slurry ponds, which...
Fun for the whole family. You go
These
there.
are oftentimes unlined, which means that they dump them into the ground without any sort of protection between the ground and the toxins.
Can seep into the waterways.
And so Obama's regulation was, you can keep doing that, but there's a deadline for when you have to clean it up. So you can dump it there, but it can only stay there for like 3 years, which... I'm no scientist, but it takes shorter than 3 years for some toxins to seep into the fucking ground.
Well, and it's also like, if you're lucky, it'll seep into the groundwater sooner than that, and your pond will keep emptying out through the groundwater, and you can keep filling it up.
Right. So basically, Obama's regulation was not a regulation. It was a way, just like his presidency, it was a way to make it look like you're doing some good shit. While in reality, you're just perpetuating the destructive and oppressive empire. So Trump saying that he was going to get rid of that regulation, sure, that sucks that it can stay there for longer than 3 years, but it shouldn't be fucking there at all. So,
and often, I don't know what the rule is on this, but often these corporations, depending on how large they are, will find that they'll just pay the fine. Right. So they get to the 3-year mark, and okay, you're going to be fined, $100,000 for every month that you'll have it, and you continue to have it there or whatever. And they're like, okay, it's like a parking ticket. We'd rather just keep paying that.
Yeah, as if the kids that died of liver failure really give a flying fuck whether you paid $100,000. And of course, this is the issue that I have with ideas that you could pay to pollute. But that's something that we've talked about on the show and we can come back to. But kind of circling back here to this lawsuit that was filed in Los Angeles this past Tuesday, which challenges the Bureau of Land Management's plan to open more than 1 million acres of public lands in Central California to oil and gas leasing. The issue that I have with that is, great that you're putting together that lawsuit, awesome. But it suggests that it's not the current policy of the BLM, the Bureau of Land Management, to lease out primarily to oil and gas. But it totally is. I can't remember, what was that environmentalist's name who went to...
Tim DeChristopher.
So he went.
He had a great idea.
This was an environmentalist who, because they have these auctions where they basically auction off land for the BLM auctions off land
and
for use.
And it's almost exclusively auctioned to like oil and gas companies.
But that's the point. And so De Christopher went to one of these auctions and stood up and said, "I want to buy all this land, but not for oil and gas use," which is illegal.
Well, no. Well, hold on. He acted like he was part of the group, that's normally at these things. And he said, you don't say what you're auctioning for, but they assume you have millions of dollars. You're generally someone who works with these corporations or whatever. So he raised his hand and bought all this land. And then when they said, okay, give us the money, he said, oh, I don't actually have the money. And so it was a false bid. But here's the thing, is it was towards the end of it was the last year of the Bush administration. And by the time that they had found out he didn't have the money, sent him through trial, put him into prison, and tried to re-auction that land, it was too late. Obama had gotten into office and ended the auctions. So Tim De Christopher actually saved, I think it's millions of acres of land from being torn up by oil and gas.
Which, again, was very brave, but it's actually illegal in a lot of instances to use these certain tracts of land for anything but.
Right.
Which is fucking insane.
Anything but oil and gas.
Right. So according to the Wilderness Society, according to data that was analyzed by the Wilderness Society, so this is data from the BLM, 90% of public lands are available to oil and gas drillers. Only 10% are set aside for conservation and other, like recreation.
See, what if I want to purchase 1 million acres to like set up a little kiosk and sell bracelets I've made? Can I do that? I can't do that.
No. Well, you have to go after the 10% that aren't already on lock by the oil and gas industry.
It's bullshit.
So this is the thing. It's like, I think it's great that we're kind of bringing this into the conversation that, like, yes, there are environmental groups suing BLM for opening up more land, for oil and gas, but let's not pretend that they're not already doing that. So really the entire structure of the Bureau of Land Management needs to be fucking scrapped and start over, because the Bureau of Land Management exists because it's supposed to be protecting and making available public lands for the public, not for private corporations that are making a killing off of oil and gas. Right. So really, and of course, the further issue is that when you open up these lands to oil and gas, it doesn't stop there. Right? It's not like, oh, I'm just on this little tract of land and I'm not affecting the world around me by drilling for fucking oil and gas. Like, of course you are. Right. It doesn't start and end in that tract of land. And of course, at this point, it almost becomes trite talking about how vital conservation is, but that's really what the BLM's charge is and should continue to be, or should start to be.
And this is part of a process that's ongoing in our government and maybe governments worldwide. Or largely governments worldwide, is the capture of the regulatory bodies that are designed to protect the people, protect the land, protect the average citizen against the corporation, against the powerful, against the capitalists and the billionaires. They slowly capture these agencies, and it is kind of inevitable. Now, I don't want to minimize the fights and the successes of activists who have succeeded in getting some of these regulatory bodies to actually do their jobs in certain circumstances, or actually hold certain corporations accountable. That is wonderful work. But in terms of the inevitability of it, I view it as gravity, and it kind of helped me myself understand the way capitalism works. There's a gravity towards the capture of the state, of these bodies, of the regulations that are meant to protect the people. And that gravity continues no matter what. Now, you may have a success. You may push back and achieve some regulation that wasn't there before, such as the 2 years that we successfully held on to net neutrality before it was gutted. But that gravity is not going away. It's going to continue. You may roll the boulder up to the top of the hill, but it may be 10 years from now, it may be 100, that boulder is going to eventually either crumble into dust or roll down that hill. Because that gravity isn't going anywhere. And so capitalism has a gravity towards these things, towards this. And exactly what you're describing right now is how it works. They have captured this regulatory body, and that's why you have so much land, so much public land being given over to oil and gas and therefore being destroyed.
Yeah. Amen.
Let's move on to it's an interesting story, and you know a little more about it than I do. But I wanted to say that it was kind of weird because this past week I was in Oakland at the California Progressive Alliance Summit, and thank you guys for having me there. I had a great time performing for the group there. A lot of wonderful people and a lot of different groups coming together, and one of the articles that I found in the local newspaper that I figured I would talk about on stage was about these Oakland moms. And they're all single moms that and I think they were all, maybe they were all single moms of color who had basically gone into this house that was not being used, that the people had been evicted. It was just sitting there, and I think it was sitting there for maybe years. And they decided, we don't have a home. We're trying to take care of our kids. We live in an area that's getting incredibly expensive. We can't afford property. I mean, San Francisco is the most expensive housing market in the Bay Area, most expensive housing market in like the nation. And there's a house just sitting here, and let's use it. And so they started using this house, and more moms joined them. It may have even just begun with one mom. And anyway, they were recently evicted, and the court said they had no right to be in that house.
So first, I want to start with some stats here. Well, mostly just one. So you hear people talking about minimum wage or living wage. Something that's come up with this group called Moms for Housing, the number 4, you could look them up on Instagram and other platforms. They're discussing a housing wage, what someone has to make in order to, without being quote unquote rent burdened, which means basically statistically that you're not spending more than 30% of your income on rent. So in Oakland, in Alameda County in Oakland, you have to earn more than $48 an hour to afford average rent.
Jesus Christ.
$48 an hour. I've never made $48 an hour in my entire life. Now, if we
I did, but it was back when I was selling the ass.
Whose ass?
Oh, mine.
Oh. Well, I'd say that's a pretty good going rate for. I actually don't know. I have no idea what the going rate is for man ass.
I love whose ass? Joe's. You don't know him.
Well, that's a valid question.
I agree.
So, and it's also important to note that if you look at the statistics, oh my God, I said it. If you look at those things regarding black women make less than, like, on average, they make less than any other group that is profiled. White women, Hispanic, Latinx women,
and the wage gap. A lot of people, I think people, these idiots, certain libertarians and stuff, want to be like, oh well, that's because women are more likely to take lower paying jobs because they want to do things like nursing or something, and they want to do things like teaching children, and therefore, blah blah blah. Bullshit. We're talking comparing the same fucking jobs, you idiots. We're talking about, like, white men in a specific job earn whatever percent more than a black woman in the same goddamn job, okay? Quit it with the, there's fucking idiot arguments that, like, Jordan Peterson fans fucking repeat about, like, well, women like to teach children, and teaching children just doesn't pay as much. We're talking about the same goddamn job. Sorry.
No, let it out.
I didn't realize you were going to get me into that.
People love you for your rants. So, yeah. So basically what happened is last Tuesday, I believe it was, cops in riot gear. Again, this shows one of the reasons that this story is so powerful is it once again shows the intersection of housing inequality, race inequality, gender inequality, and of course income inequality. Cops in riot gear showed up to this one house where basically like a small group of black mothers had set up house. And here's the thing: the house, they didn't break into the house. It's very important to note that this house had been well known in the neighborhood for being a squat house. So it was already vacant, and they just decided, look, I don't have fucking money to house my children. I don't have, it's either this or homelessness. And of course, it's very important to note that shelters around the area are notoriously violent. Also, moms who go into shelters are much more likely to be separated from their children.
Right, they risk losing their kids.
Exactly. So they went into...
if you had to choose, even if they're not breaking into the house, but even if they did break into a house, if you had to choose, and I'm asking the listeners here, if you had to choose between continuing to be with your child or breaking into an empty house that has sat there empty for months and months and living there and not harming anyone, which are you going to choose?
Yeah. I mean, I don't even have fucking kids, but I would easily go for the house. Having seen shelters, even, again, without kids. So what happened on Tuesday is that cops in riot gear showed up at this house to evict the homeless moms and their families, and and basically there was a huge show of solidarity because the moms had done a really good job of not just getting local attention but national attention to this
it's
problem.
Become a national story.
Yeah, so this intersection of race and class and income inequality, and it was it was an incredibly powerful show. But of course, as Lee mentioned, the so-called justice system is not coming down on the mother's side.
Yeah, and I think there's something in us that when we grow up in this culture, we grow up in America, there's something, even if you're a lefty, even if you care about everyone, even if you care about these mothers, there's something deep in us that's like, well, the house isn't theirs, they shouldn't have taken it. But let's think about this a little deeper. We live, although we're told not to believe this, and we are basically never told this on your mainstream airwaves, we live in a post-scarcity world. If the amount of materials and housing and food were not thrown out and were dealt with properly, and we had systems in place and it were spread out to the people that really needed it, the entire world could eat and drink clean water and have housing. And so technically we live in a post-scarcity world. No one should be suffering. No one should be homeless. And in America, we have, now I know this was back when the foreclosures were rampant, so I'm sure these numbers are higher than they are now, but it was 6 empty homes for every homeless person. There were 6 homes sitting empty, unable to be sold, no one living in them. The bank had stolen them, and they were sitting there, and yet we tell people they have to sleep on a sidewalk or sleep in a shelter. And nowadays, let's assume it's decreased. Let's assume it's 3 empty homes for every homeless person. It's fucking ridiculous. It's a joke. There are homes sitting there. Let people who need them be inside of them. And furthermore, if we're talking about ownership, whether they own this house, the banks have stolen a lot of these homes. They often, didn't own the home because they can't find the paperwork because they put it through the MERS system and they don't have any paperwork that says they own these homes, yet they take them and steal them anyway. And they own the courts so they can get the people the courts to tell these people that they can't have the house anymore. On top of that, you have the subprime predatory lending where they set it up for these people to fail. They gave them a home, destroyed their lives, and stole their home from them, and they knew that these people did not know what they were signing on for. So this is truly stealing a home. The banks are stealing them from people, and these mothers were living in one of those homes. And so if you want to say they didn't own it, well, neither did the fucking courts, neither did the banks.
Right, and also that's a stupid fucking argument because if you don't have the money to survive, then the idea that you'd have to shell out, an exorbitant amount of money just to have a roof over your head. That if that's how the system works, then it doesn't work.
Great point.
And this, in the Bay Area, I've reported on this before. The Bay Area is infamous for these sort of evictions and the violent gentrification. These guys showed up in fucking riot gear to arrest mothers and their children. Like that's the situation here. And just as an example, one local media station pointed out that the Contra Costa County, which is in the Bay Area, sheriff served 1,622 eviction notices in 2019.
Jesus Christ.
That's because, and there was another point that was made. I don't know if she's one of the mothers that was involved in this or just an ally or accomplice. But she made the point that multiple agencies and elected officials had to conspire for this pre-dawn raid to happen. And there's absolutely no reason that a nonviolent civil disobedience action, which I wouldn't even call it that because living and existing shouldn't be civil disobedience, there's no reason that this should have resulted in tanks, assault rifles, and shock troops in a residential neighborhood for an eviction of moms and babies.
Well, and there's 2 points to be made here, I think, that into a larger issue. One is that, and you and I have discussed this many times, but our police, they use weapons of war way too often. I mean, I'm okay with the idea of a SWAT team existing for the incredibly rare scenario that you have someone with their own weapons of war sitting there with a grenade launcher holding up a family or something. I can understand that at times there needs to be a force that could take on something like that. I mean, a tank did at one point go down the LA freeway, but that shit is incredibly rare. And that is the only time these people should show up in these weapons of war, with every type of arsenal they can come up with. But instead, you have these cops using this shit all the time because SWAT, I wish I had the numbers in front of me, but the number of SWAT usages, meaning SWAT teams show up in SWAT gear, has skyrocketed. It used to be incredibly rare. Now it's fairly common. And the reason is because they have these weapons of war. They want to use them. They want to find excuses to use them. So even when it is mothers in a home peacefully with children, they still think, oh, here is our chance to try out the new MRAP, to try out our concussion grenades, to see whether we're trained for full-on war. But of course, what ends up happening usually, or maybe not usually, but sadly too often, is someone ends up getting killed or shot simply because these cops show up like this, and they're with a hair trigger ready to attack.
Yeah, and so another point, kind of circling back to the ownership issue. The owner of this house is called Wedgwood, and it owns 125 properties in the Bay and specializes in flipping properties. I'm going to go ahead and re-quote Martin Luther King here. It was legal to do what Hitler did, and it was illegal to help the Jews. If it's legal to buy up property en masse and force people into homelessness and all of the violence that involves, and it is illegal to find shelter for your children as a mother, then that is no law that you should fucking follow. And this company has a simple model, which is what all flipping is. It's buy a house at a low price because they've, been victims of foreclosure, sit on it, add a coat of paint or two, and sell it high. And this company,
and this
which
is how these housing markets run away.
This company, which is registered it's based in Southern California, but it's registered in 18 states.
Right.
And Vice News reported that it has a actual custom-made Monopoly board on its wall. Like, seriously, these are, you couldn't be more stereotypically evil capitalists.
Super villains.
If you fucking tried. And the moms even reached out to them, to try to come up with something that they could work with. They asked for the home to be sold at cost to a land trust that will keep affordable housing in the community. But Wedgwood said, quote, "We have made it clear since the very beginning that Wedgwood would not negotiate with a squatters group as long as they illegally occupy the company's property."
Yeah, these are straight up supervillains.
Yeah.
Like, I feel like they probably wear, like, black capes or something.
Hey, I like black capes. But this is not unusual. This is the story, not just in the Bay Area, although in the Bay Area it's very concentrated and overt because of the tech boom, but this is a story all across the country.
I'm going to give you, I think we're ready to move on the topic. I'm going to give you the choice. We can talk about healthcare, or we can talk about drones in American skies.
This would be one of those moments where it would help to have like a live feed where you could get the pulse on.
Oh, yeah, the pulse of the audience, yeah.
But since I can't.
Well, anybody listening right now, yell at your device. Yeah, if you're listening out of your laptop, yell at your laptop, and we'll hear you.
But we
1, 2, 3. Shh.
The episode
1, shh.
yet.
Quiet. Don't
It's
tell
not
them that.
posted.
They don't know.
It's not posted.
They don't know.
It's
They
not.
think it's live.
It's not. No.
They
No,
do.
don't.
They do. Okay, everybody, yell right now. Oh, interesting. I'll let you start.
I'm going to pass it over to Lee because he's the one smoking the good weed. Let's talk about military drones.
Oh, okay. Thank you all for voting on that. Military drones, apparently, according to a Truth Out article, and this is, and let me preface this by saying this has been something that I'm sure they've wanted for many years, but it has been an area that they haven't really been able to go into, the government, I mean, our military. Drones in American skies have been largely frowned upon. I mean, military grade drones, so not your little Amazon delivery stuff. Military grade drones have really been like frowned upon and viewed as a kind of no-go area that was not going to happen. But as we kind of know, any level of surveillance that you think isn't going to happen or won't happen in America eventually gets there. I think for a long time people felt the idea of them monitoring all of our phone calls was never going to happen, and here we are. So the U.S. military and defense contractors are going to try out a system of drones over American skies. The defense contractor General Atomics Aeronautical Systems, Inc. will
What kind of name is that?
Will test fly. Well, I think they always are trying different things to make their names so hard to either remember or say that people can't criticize them, to like stop activists, because like they kind of learned from like Monsanto that everybody would just call it Monsatan and stuff, like, and then it tarnishes their brand and things like that. So Blackwater switched their name to Z, like an unpronounceable fucking bullshit.
The artist formerly known as
formerly known as a fucking mercenary killers. Anyway, so this one I think went with a lot of words so that you would just have too many to like it would fill up.
Yeah, I've already forgotten.
It would fill up your tweet. And so you didn't have enough characters left. General Atomics Aeronautical Systems Inc. will test fly its Sky Guardian drone. That doesn't sound dystopian at all. Outfitted with a 79-foot wingspan and advanced surveillance capabilities of 2,000 feet over San Diego. Lucky San Diego. Wow, this has been a big California episode. Over San Diego sometime this year. It's pretty horrifying. By the way, the Sky Guardian drone is also known as the Predator B. Does that sound better?
Good
Do you feel more
Lord.
comfortable with a Predator B over your head or a Sky Guardian? But the point initially, I'm sure they'll say this, is just surveillance. We're just making sure that bad things aren't happening in your
if
neighborhoods.
you have nothing to hide.
And furthermore, they'll then, I guarantee you, at some point once they've started this test, they'll find a time that they stopped a crime. Like they'll be like, oh, Sky, and then all the mainstream media will run with Sky Guardian drone catches pedophile dragging young girl into his home. And they'll use that story to get all of America to go, oh man, we need these drones everywhere.
Just like the DNA testing that caught again, California, the Golden State Killer.
You mean the you sign up on your own DNA testing, right?
Right.
Ancestry.
Yeah. That basically because his like second cousin or something had done a DNA test, and then they were able to compare that DNA and find him. Then they're like, oh my God, everyone run out and do a DNA test. Then we'll catch all of the bad people. And it's like, also should mention that obviously this means that law enforcement, from the FBI to ICE to God knows who else, is looking at your DNA. Just keep that in mind.
Does this mean I should stop defecating on ATMs?
No, you should definitely keep doing that.
Can they test that?
Well, I recommend that you bring a little spray bottle of bleach. So after you shit on the ATM, just give it a quick spritz with the bleach.
That kind of defeats the point.
No. Because it's still a pile of shit. It's just a bleached pile of shit. I'm just saying, the more toxins you add to a problem.
You've heard of polishing a turd. This is a whole new
Bleaching
level.
it.
Whole new level of cleaning the turd.
Just trying to keep you safely.
So you're saying that these surveillance drones, they wouldn't make you feel safer over your city?
No. This is just another episode of 1984. The Home came. And of course, this speaks to the militarization, the empire, the military industrial complex. Imperialism and militarism are home games, and this is a perfect example of that. I mean, what are you going to do with those drones? You can't just play with other people. You want to test it on your local rats,
the local populace. Well, and it also speaks to the fact that one of the most dangerous things to the empire, to any empire, and or any large country that has a lot of power, is their own citizens standing up. And we've seen this in other countries where there is immense surveillance, as well as America, to try and stop their populace from standing up and demanding rights and demanding a change and demanding a new world and demanding sustainability and demanding that people aren't harmed in mass across our countries we're increasingly getting to this dystopian future that we all that Orwell so clearly wrote about, where your movements are monitored and in such a way that everybody's kind of just expected to do their standard operating procedure every single day. And I think, we're getting very close to that with basically the algorithms. Well, we're in it, but the algorithms, we're maybe not quite at the moment where the algorithms can follow your location services on your phone and test everybody around the entire city and decide whether today you're acting unusual for your standard pattern. And that's all they need to know. So they pinpoint 10 people that are acting unusual, and those are the ones they go and follow. Why are they acting unusual? This is very unlike them to do something like this. And once you get to that point, everybody is forced into behaving in a very specific way.
Yeah, and I think that's the fallacy with the argument, I have nothing to hide. Well, the biggest power of surveillance is to not actually force you to do anything, not actually oppress you in a very direct way. It just keeps you from being free to act in the way that you would. Because just think about it, the idea of you hanging out in your home, you immediately start to act differently if somebody else is there, if somebody's watching you, or if you have the feeling that somebody's watching you, then you immediately start acting differently. So it's not about whether you have anything to hide. It's about your ability to be an unobserved individual in a quote unquote free society.
Well, and the other thing I've tried to explain to, liberals and people like that, especially like this was back under Obama, where they were like, well, I have nothing to hide, right? The Snowden revelations came out. I have nothing to hide. And I wanted to say that, I did say to them, what if you were, let's say that's true right now. What if a leader or a government were to come to power that you did want to fight against, that you did have trouble with? What if you were in Nazi Germany? We all love to believe we'd be the people with the Jew in the walls that we were helping hide, right? And I'd be the Jew in the wall. But we all love to believe we'd be the ones standing up against the government if it got to that point. And I think now with Trump in office, some of these liberals might be able to understand this, that what if we get to that time where it's time for you to stand up? Do you want to be able to move freely? Do you want to be able to speak to people freely? Or do you want to be under 24/7 surveillance?
Right.
So even if you agree with everything that's happening right now, even if you love Trump, even if you love our system and everything else, think about it in a world where it is then time for you to start hiding people in your walls and decide whether you want to be monitored during that.
Right, because the framework is there, and it's going to stay there for the administrations that you don't like. And another good point before we wrap that up is I went to go see Glenn Greenwald speak after he had written the book about his interactions with Snowden. And he said, one of the things that I always do when somebody says to me, but I have nothing to hide, I hand them a blank sheet of paper and a pen, and I say, write down all of the passwords to all of your accounts. Your banking account, your Gmail. He's like, I'm not going to touch anything. I just want to look through it. I'm not going to send emails or move money. I just want to look at it. And it's like inevitably everyone would tell him no. And
Yeah.
he'd be like, well, but if you have nothing to hide. It's just the right to privacy.
Yeah.
Because the idea of some person you don't know looking through your mail sounds fucking bizarre. You don't want that.
Well,
so it's like, then why the fuck would you want it if it's some jackass at the NSA? I would much rather have Glenn Greenwald read my fucking email.
Well, and I also believe that although our Constitution is incredibly antiquated, the part of the Constitution that said you won't be forced to house soldiers in your home. Now, keep in mind, this is a time before television, before phone, before any kind of devices, anything. So the only way someone could watch you back in that time was to be next to you or to have a telescope and be watching you. Like, that was the only way they could be watching you. So I believe that the statement in the Constitution about you can't be forced to house soldiers in your home was not about like, oh, doesn't it suck to clean the sheets? It was about, I don't want to have someone over my shoulder watching me. And I believe that's really what it's defending. It's defending your right to have a closed space where you get to be yourself and not worry about being monitored. And the other thing I try to explain to people is that they can go back if you ever become something that is against the government. So take, for example, our friends in the Embassy Protection Collective who were in the embassy trying to hold the embassy legally by the rightful owners here in D.C., the Venezuelan embassy. And they technically were against our government. Our government was trying to create a coup in Venezuela, so they didn't like that these people were holding the embassy against the coup. So all of a sudden, they're technically against our government. In that situation, they can go back and as the algorithms and the computers and the data become more advanced and view everything you've ever done. If they have facial recognition, they can view every time you were ever on a camera, every time you walked anywhere, every time you people got to ask themselves, was there ever a moment in your life that you, I don't know, bought some drugs or had an affair or threw a brick through a window when you were 18 years old or, bought a hairless cat from a dwarf in a car park? Like, we've all done at least 3 or 4 of these things. And so I'm just saying, if you want someone to view your entire life just because you've gone against what they view as fucking what they're trying to accomplish.
Well, yeah, and it's so easy to pull the trigger. You just have to find one thing. For instance, another example that was brought up by folks who talk about this issue, you have to, in the user agreements, to read the magazine 17, you have to say that you're 18 or older. For 17 magazine. So... And let's be honest.
Is that because there's nude 16-year-olds in the magazine?
Know.
What the fuck's going on there?
I have not read 17 magazines, so I can't tell you.
Although weirdly, the only place you can get revolutionary articles nowadays is Teen Vogue.
I know, which is fucking bizarre.
By the way, for those of you who think we're kidding, literally. I don't quite know why. I assume some editor-in-chief took over, but you can get revolutionary articles from Teen Vogue. Teen Vogue was one of the first articles about the Standing Rock protests, and I actually quoted from it when I covered the Standing Rock protests before it became a national topic.
Yeah. But yeah, I mean, in these user agreements, like iTunes user agreements, like we all do this shit. And so or like you're having a cigarette and you're standing less than 20 feet away from a building. Like, it's so easy to get you on anything. And when they do, they can throw, like the Moms for Housing saw, they can throw the fucking military at you. So let's be very clear about this and yeah, fight it.
I know we're going a little long. Can we squeeze in here listener mail?
Yes. Oh, okay. So silver lining, because I know that Lee doesn't always like it when I end on a wah-wah note. So this was...
Wait, is that the sound of the apocalypse? Wah, wah, wah.
Yes. The apocalypse will be atonal. So this mail came from Nicholas in France, who has done really a great job of sending us updates about what's going on in France. So thank you for that. But he sent a video from the protests that have been ongoing there, which are still, by the way, ongoing. And it's a video from a right-wing outlet with a policeman talking. A policeman and a police union rep. And he says that the only thing keeping the government in place is the police. If they were to break ranks and join the other strikers, everything would fall apart. And the police says openly that we're sick of being the enforcers of political decisions and not agents of safety and justice in the larger sense.
Yes.
We're Macron's attack dogs.
Mm-hmm.
And so Nicholas makes the point that since this is a right-wing network, they either really fucked up when they vetted their guest, or this is something that the police union has as a point of view, that they don't actually, that this has been going on for over a year, and that the majority of police on the streets don't actually enjoy beating the shit out of nonviolent protesters. And regardless of what your feeling of police is, this is a powerful mention and a powerful interview, because it shows some hope there. It shows that the breaking down, this sort of like show of humanity, where it's like the cops on the streets that are sent out there to serve and protect the interests of the 1% are tired. They're tired, and they don't want to be on the front lines. Most of them, they don't want to have to keep beating the shit out of their neighbors. And this is the power of these protests. And I know that it sucks that this has been going on for so long, and it's still ongoing, even though a few unions in France have agreed to call off the strike starting on January 20th. But this is the power.
Not all of them.
Not all of them. And this is the power. And just on Friday, actually, Macron had to be rushed out of a theater because protesters broke in. So fuck yeah. But my point is that this is the power of these ongoing protests. You wear down not just the state, but you wear down the agents of the state. And we've seen this in South America. We've seen instances where the cops have changed sides. So this is something that's possible, and it's very powerful. And when that happens, protesters should be ready for people to change ranks and open to that possibility. And what does that mean for our security culture? What does that mean for our diversity in building and fighting? And these are all questions that we have to ask in our various community spaces. But again, look at this as the power of these prolonged protests. So thank you, Nicholas, for sending that along.
Yeah, I mean, that is in large scale change, that is one of the key points, is the moment that the police decide to defend the people against the state, because they generally act like the fists of the fascist state, and a lot of change can happen, because I mean, a lot of, and it might not be as far away as it seems, because police often seem so entrenched in their ideals and things, but a lot of the police that we saw around Occupy, at the Occupy encampments, I'd say a large percentage of them they were willing to arrest us if their captain told them to arrest them, but a lot of them understood why we were doing what we were doing, and understood that we were standing up for the, bottom 80-90% of the country that the police are part of. So we're defending their rights, and their right to have a nice life, and their right to not be exploited by the powerful and the rich. And I think some of them kind of understood that, a fair number. But, I don't want to overstate it. I realize that Captain Ray Lewis, who we are both friends with, who's done incredible stuff at Occupy and standing with the protesters and everything, he has talked about how he thought that he'd have many retired police people with him when he did this, and he has not found many.
Yeah, no, we shouldn't make it sound like, oh, all cops could be swayed, because that's obviously not true. And I stand by the phrase "all cops are bastards," not because no, it's true, not because all human beings that become cops are assholes inherently, but when you put on that uniform, you become the bastard of the state, and you become their attack dog, like this policeman said in that interview in France. And so therefore all cops are bastards. And it's important to keep that in mind, and not start, working with police when we're planning actions and shit. But again, have these questions at the ready to say, with these prolonged protests, the potential for this switch to happen becomes a real potential. And we need to talk about what that would look like, and what that outreach will look like if and when that time comes. And so that is also a sliver of hope I see for this country, if and when it devolves into some sort of revolution, because of the size of our military and our police. Really, the only hope we have for avoiding mass murder is that they'll switch sides. So what does that look like?
And let's be clear, we'd much prefer that our government listens to the people and starts giving them health care and things, rather than this devolving into what you're talking about. Absolutely. But That is the show, and we hope you'll come join us over at patreon.com/commoncensored. We're going to do an extra 10 to 15 minutes over there for all of our members who keep the show going. That's patreon.com/commoncensored. We're coming to Philadelphia. Hope to see you there for both the anti-war protest and the shows on Saturday and Sunday, although Saturday I think is sold out. That's at leecamp.com. Anything else?
Act out.
Keep fighting.